I would therefore now invite the Council to turn to Agenda Item 16, Economic and Social Repercussions of the Israeli Occupation on the Living Conditions of the Palestinian People in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem, and the Arab population in the occupied Syrian Golan. I invite delegations to take action on the two draft resolutions issued as documents E/2021/L6 and E/2021/L7, respectively. I would first give the floor to the distinguished representative of Guyana on behalf of the Group of 77 in China to introduce in one statement the two draft resolutions in EL6 as well as L7 entitled Situation of the Assistance to Palestinian Women. Guyana, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the Group of 77 and China, I am honored to introduce the draft resolution E/2021/L.6, entitled Economic and Social Repercussions of the Israeli Occupation on the Living Conditions of the Palestinian People in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and the Arab population in the occupied Syrian Golan. The resolution expresses grave concern about the detrimental repercussions on the economic and social conditions of the Palestinian people caused by the prolonged occupation and its associated regime inside the occupied Palestinian territory, including in and around East Jerusalem, with a particular emphasis on the dire situation in the Gaza Strip and the resulting violation of their economic and social rights, including the rights to work, to health, to education, to property, to adequate standard of living, and to freedom of access and movement. To this end, the resolution calls for the cessation of the construction of settlements and for the occupying power to cease the construction of the wall and to comply with its legal obligations as per the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, rendered 16 years ago, and to cease its destruction of homes and properties, and to cease its exploitation of natural resources in the occupied Palestinian territory and the occupied Syrian Golan, in keeping with the principle of the permanent sovereignty of the peoples under foreign occupation over their natural resources. Further, the resolution expresses deep concern at the rising incidences of violence, harassment, provocation, vandalism, and incitement by Israeli settlers against Palestinians, and calls for accountability for these illegal actions. The resolution also highlights the situation of Palestinian prisoners and detainees and calls for urgent action to their plight in accordance with international law. Moreover, Mr. President, the resolution expresses appreciation for the economic and humanitarian assistance provided to the Palestinian people and urges continued assistance commensurate with increased socio-economic and humanitarian needs. It encourages all states and international organizations to continue to actively pursue policies that ensure respect for their obligations under international law with regard to all illegal Israeli practices and measures in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. The draft resolution underscores the urgency of achieving without delay an end to the Israeli occupation that began in 1967 and a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace settlement on all tracks, and reiterates the need for increased and renewed international efforts in this regard. Mr. President, we look forward to the adoption of this draft resolution, which was submitted in the 2020 session, but upon which no action was taken due to COVID restrictions in relation to in-person meetings, with the strong hope that it will contribute to alleviating the economic and social hardships of the Palestinian and Syrian civilian populations living under Israel's foreign occupation, and ultimately contribute to the international efforts to bring to an end this injustice and achieve peace in line with the United Nations Charter and international law, including humanitarian and human rights law. Mr. President, I am also honored to introduce on behalf of the Group of 77 and China, Draft Resolution E/L7, entitled Situation of and Assistance to Palestinian Women. This resolution addresses the obstacles and challenges faced by Palestinian women and girls, notably under occupation, and urges continued international support for them, with the aim of ensuring respect for their rights and providing them with the necessary protection and assistance. Limited but significant additions have been made to the draft resolution. In particular, note is taken of the importance of giving high priority to the swift adoption of the family protection law to ensure that women and girls are protected from gender-based violence, including domestic violence. The resolution welcomes the adoption by the Palestinian government of a national plan of action for the implementation of Security Council Resolution 1325 of 2000, as well as of initiatives at the legislative, administrative, and security levels to advance women's rights, notably in relation to family law and combating violence against women. The resolution also reaffirms the importance of increasing the role of women in peace-building and decision-making with regard to conflict prevention and the peaceful resolution of conflicts as part of efforts to ensure the safety and well-being of all women in the region, with emphasis on women's equal participation and involvement in all efforts for the achievement, maintenance, and promotion of peace and security. In addition, the resolution reaffirms that the Israeli occupation remains a major obstacle for Palestinian women and girls with regard to the fulfillment of their rights and their advancement, and calls upon Israel, the occupying power, to immediately seize all measures contrary to international law, as well as discriminatory legislation, policies, and actions in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, that violate the human rights of the Palestinian people. The international community is urged to continue to give special attention to the promotion and protection of the human rights of Palestinian women and girls, and intensify measures to improve the difficult conditions faced by Palestinian women and their families, including those living under Israeli occupation and Palestinian refugees, as well as to continue to provide them with urgently needed assistance. Mr. President, the resolution calls upon the parties to comply fully with their obligations, including as state parties to CEDAW, and reaffirms the obligation of states all parties to armed conflict to comply with international humanitarian law and international human rights law, and stresses the need to ensure accountability and end impunity. The resolution stresses the need for Palestine to fully implement its obligations under the instruments to which it acceded that protect the rights of women and girls. We look forward to the adoption of this draft resolution as it addresses the obstacles faced by Palestinian women, recognizes their rights, and identifies the means and support necessary to achieve their fulfillment in line with the UN's repeated commitments to advance women's rights worldwide and with international law. I urge for everyone to vote in support of these two very important resolutions. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Guyana, speaking on behalf of the Group of 77 in China. The Council will now first take action on Draft Resolution E/2021/L6, entitled Economic and Social Repercussions of the Israeli Occupation on the Living Conditions of the Palestinian People in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem, and the Arab population in the occupied Syrian Golan. I have been informed that the draft resolution contains no program budget implications. Should any delegation not a member of the Group of 77 in China who wish to co-sponsor the draft resolution L6, please signify by pressing the microphone button. I have an indication from Turkey, as a co-sponsor of the draft resolution. A recorded vote has been requested on draft resolution L6 entitled Economic and Social Repercussions of the Israeli Occupation on the Living Conditions of the Palestinian People in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem, and the Arab population in the occupied Syrian Golan. Before we proceed to the vote, I will first give the floor to any delegation wishing to make a general statement in connection with the draft resolution, and thereafter to any member of the Council wishing to make a statement in explanation of vote. Delegations are reminded that, in accordance with Rule 62 of the Rules of Procedure of the Economic and Social Council, the sponsor of a proposal is not permitted to speak in explanation of vote on the proposal. Delegations are also reminded that, in accordance with Rule 63, no representative may interrupt the voting except on a point of order in connection with the actual process of voting. I have two delegations on the list to make general statements on the draft resolution. The first speaker is the distinguished representative of the State of Palestine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me at the outset to congratulate you for your election and for immediately taking the initiative to convene this council so it can honor its responsibility in a timely manner. I also wish to extend our thanks to Ms. Rola Dashti, the Executive Secretary of ESQA, for her tireless efforts as well as of her team to promote development and cooperation in our region, and for their contribution to the report of the Secretary General on the economic and social repercussions of the Israeli occupation. Palestine is a unique place for humanity, supposedly blessed by the holiness of its land, its geography at the crossroad of 3 continents, and by its weather and fertile land. However, that uniqueness and that placement heavily influence its history and the history of its people. Palestine is potentially rich. Its people are educated, talented, with a true entrepreneurial spirit and a proven steadfastness. It has the human and natural resources it needs for its development in many fields, including tourism, agriculture, industry, technology. It could be a high-tech country, the #1 destination in the world, a hub for high-quality and ecologically friendly products. But it is deprived from the ability to exploit these resources. The dire economic and social conditions of the Palestinian people are man-made, occupation-made. Our nation has an unbelievable potential that, if unleashed by freedom and independence, would change the lives of millions of Palestinians and would make us almost overnight aid independent. Our reality is very different. Since 1967, Israel, by design, ensured confinement of Palestinians in areas where they already lived, an expansion of settlements in the most fertile and the holy parts of our land, with the aim to eventually annex maximum Palestinian land with minimum Palestinians. 60% of the occupied West Bank is virtually off limits for Palestinians, including the Jordan Valley, our rich reservoir in water and resources, and our gateway to the world. East Jerusalem, the natural, political, economic, historic, cultural, and touristic heart of Palestine, is unlawfully annexed and severed from its Palestinian environment. The Gaza Strip is now for 13 years under blockade. It is a miracle that despite the fragmentation of our land, the oppression of our people, and the theft of our resources, we are, with international support and national resilience, able to cope. Our youth are systematically targeted. They suffer from mass arbitrary imprisonment. They face high unemployment rates, and many have been effectively cut off from the rest of the world. This should have meant a lost generation, and yet the inventivity and connectivity this Palestinian generation displays in the most difficult conditions is nothing short from impressive. This resolution that will be adopted today reasserts the Palestinian people's economic and social rights in the face of persistent violations that undermine their ability to fulfill any of the SDGs and their most basic and fundamental rights. We thank you for your political, economic, and social support to Palestine that aims to precipitate the day where our people can unleash their true potential, changing not only their reality, but the region and the world. And we call on all delegations to vote in favor of this resolution. We will also be adopting today a resolution on Palestinian women, who are among the most vulnerable to the policies and practices of the Israeli occupation. This resolution focuses on what needs to be done to transform their reality by Israel, the occupying power, by the State of Palestine, and by the international community. While the occupation remains the main obstacle to the fulfillment of their rights, we also acknowledge our own obligation, including as a state party to CEDAW and a country committed to the implementation of Security Resolution 1325. This includes aligning our national legislation and plans with our international obligations, notably through the swift adoption of the Family Protection Law. This does not stem from some foreign diktat, but from our own history and national vision as encapsulated in our Declaration of Independence. The Palestinian women movement was established in the late 19th century, and almost immediately had to conduct a parallel struggle against the denial of our national rights and for women's rights. I grew up learning about the great figures of this movement, as well as about its many anonymous heroes, the women that became a homeland for their families in exile, or a home when their house was demolished, those who endure arbitrary imprisonment, either themselves or of their loved ones, or the ones that pursue their dream when everything coalesced to make them abandon it. One of the greatest honors of my life is to be the son of one of the most committed representative and most passionate advocates of this women movement. We call on you to vote in favor of this resolution in support of Palestinian women's rights in the face of occupation and oppression, discrimination, and denial of rights. Palestinian women deserve your support. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the State of Palestine. The next speaker on the list to make a general statement is the distinguished representative of the Syrian Arab Republic. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation welcomes the ESQA report E/2020/62. This report documents how the protracted Israeli occupation of occupied Palestinian territory and the occupied Syrian Golan negatively affects the living conditions of the Syrian and Palestinian population and negatively affects the economic and social development of these occupied territories. The negative repercussion of Israeli practices, policies, and occupation are felt in different sectors. They affect the future of population of the people living under occupation. My delegation strongly rejects the propaganda by some quote-unquote Israeli media, according to which there's a government plan to expand settlements in the occupied Syrian Golan, increase the number of settlers in that area to 250,000 by 2048, and divide fertile lands which could be used to expand Syrian villages in order to establish a national park. Imagine, ladies and gentlemen, that Israel, the occupying power, is planning to continue with its occupation of the Syrian Golan, is planning to expand that occupation and settlements by 2048 instead of implementing the resolutions of international legitimacy according to which these lands are occupied and according to which Israel must withdraw from occupied territories to establish comprehensive and just peace. Mr. President, the report notes the dangers of wide discriminatory construction restrictions imposed by the Israeli occupation on the Syrian population in the occupied Syrian Golan. These restrictions further exacerbate the pressure on our infrastructure and lead to overcrowding because of the confiscation of land. This is felt even more today, and it is more dangerous today because of the pandemic. Mr. President, allow me to recall some of the practices by the Israeli occupation in the occupied Syrian Golan, which have dangerous repercussions on Syrian citizens. The occupying power is changing our schools' curricula as an attempt to influence our young students and separate them from their Syrian identity. They are imposing Israeli curricula on them. Mr. President, we note that the new Israeli land registration system imposes new rules requiring specific documents to prove ownership of land. Most Syrians have old ownership documents that do not meet the requirements of the new system. This could prevent them from proving ownership of their own land, and this could lead to the Syrian occupation confiscating these lands. In conclusion, Mr. President, I call on all member states to vote for a draft resolution entitled Economic and Social Repercussions of the Israeli Occupation on the Living Conditions of the Palestinian People in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and the Arab population in the occupied Syrian Golan E/2021/L6 to end the discriminatory practices of the Israeli occupation against Syrians and Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory and the occupied Syrian Golan, because these practices have dangerous repercussions, especially today with the spread of COVID-19. We fully understand that this organization is the main defender of international law. This is why we have to preserve the power of law as opposed to the law of power and occupation. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Syrian Arab Republic, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Israel.
Mr. President, the draft resolution before the Council is deeply flawed in its content. This is clear. Year after year, the resolution and the report on which it is based have been picked apart for their unsupportable accusations, the deliberate lack of content, and the shameless lack of balance. This time, to add insult to injury, procedure has been ignored for political ends. The purpose of the meeting is to take action on draft resolutions submitted in the 2020 ECOSOC session. This draft resolution, however, was not submitted in the previous session. Its authors chose not to submit it. The session is now concluded, and according to the rules of procedure, there is no legal basis to consider the draft. We can suspect that the draft resolution was not submitted during the previous session because there was no reason other than the political one, since it does not contain anything new. The authors of the draft seem oblivious to the global COVID-19 situation, and this is not an oversight. Statements of the UN officials and press releases from the UN entities detail the strong positive cooperation between Israel and the Palestinian Authority in addressing the crisis. As usual, when facts do not support the narrative, the facts conveniently go away. The facts are that the government of Israel has strengthened its cooperation with the UN and the Palestinian Authority in order to mitigate the disastrous effects of COVID-19. Israel has called the international community to direct international aid to the Palestinian Authority and organized a meeting in which multiple stakeholders discussed how to better coordinate national and international efforts to aid the Gaza Strip. On the ground, the ongoing cooperation has yielded many results, such as joint consultations and deliberations between expert-level officials, training and guidance of Palestinian medical teams, delivery of COVID-19-related aid. Israel has also delivered hundreds of testing and protection kits to the Gaza Strip. In the Security Council briefing held on March 30, 2020, the SG Special Coordinator Nikolai Meladnov praised the far-reaching measures that both Israel and the Palestinian Authority have taken to try and contain the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Over the past half year, we've heard from world leaders and from senior UN leadership that this is not a time for business as usual. Today, Council members can support those calls. This is an opportunity to acknowledge that the draft before the Council has nothing to do with the truth or with the UN ideals, and that in this case, there is no procedural basis for adopting the resolution. For all these reasons, we urge Council members to vote against the draft. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Israel for her statement. Is there any other delegation wishing to make a statement, general statement? I see none. Does a member of the Council wish to make a statement in explanation of vote before the vote? I have two speakers listed. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Germany on behalf of the European Union. You have the floor, Germany.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union, while reconfirming that, as in the past, the EU will support the ECOSOC resolution, economic and social repercussions of the Israeli occupation on the living conditions of the Palestinian people in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem and the Arab population in the occupied Syrian Golan. I would like to put on record that the use of the term Palestine in this resolution cannot be construed as recognition of a state of Palestine and is without prejudice to the individual positions of EU member states on this issue, and hence on the question of the validity of an accession to the conventions and treaties mentioned therein. I wish also to clarify that the EU has not expressed a legal qualification with regard to the term forced displacement used in this resolution. Lastly, I would like to put on the record that the EU and its member states consider that Palestinian government refers to the Palestinian Authority. Furthermore, the EU as a whole has not expressed itself on the use of certain legal terms in this resolution. With this understanding, the EU supports this resolution, and the EU member states that are members of the ECOSOC will be voting in favor. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Germany speaking on behalf of the European Union, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United States. United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United States is disappointed yet again at the presentation of a one-sided and biased resolution, which we cannot support. The resolution before us during this 2021 ECOSOC session is virtually identical to those previously considered by ECOSOC. Its deficiencies should be well known to this body by now. We remain very concerned about the decidedly one-sided bias against Israel that still exists within the United Nations Economic and Social Council. This resolution, like others before it, as well as the accompanying report, do nothing to advance the aspirations of the Palestinians and Israelis for a more secure, peaceful, and prosperous future. The resolution and the report are unbalanced and unfairly single out Israel in a forum that is not intended to be politicized. The only realistic path to end this conflict is through negotiations, aimed at achieving a comprehensive and lasting peace. Biased and counterproductive resolutions and reports like these have no place in our discourse. Rather than perpetuating politicized resolutions and reports such as this, the international community should rally around productive and tangible efforts that improve the situation on the ground. For example, the historic Abraham Accords breakthrough is the most significant step towards peace in the Middle East in over 25 years. The United Arab Emirates is the first Arab state to recognize Israel since the Israel-Jordan peace treaty was signed on October 26, 1994. And just last week, the Kingdom of Bahrain joined the UAE in establishing full diplomatic relations with Israel. The countries have committed to the exchange of embassies and ambassadors and have begun cooperation in a broad range of fields, including education, healthcare, trade, and security. Expanded business and financial ties between these thriving economies will accelerate growth and economic opportunity across the Middle East. The deal provides a foundation for further advances toward regional peace in the future. The accords will allow further exploration of the U.S. vision for peace, which lays out a comprehensive, fair, realistic, and lasting peace between Israel and the Palestinians and in the region. The United States stands ready to help promote economic security. The United States will work with all parties to improve conditions and promote the cause of peace. But resolutions such as this do nothing to improve the situation. As such, we have no choice but to vote against this resolution. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States. Is there any other delegation wishing to explain the vote before the vote? I see none. The Council will now commence with the process of voting on draft resolution L6 entitled Economic and Social Repercussions of the Israeli Occupation on the Living Conditions of the Palestinian People in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and the Arab population in the occupied Syrian Golan. Council members are kindly requested to indicate their votes.
The Council is now voting on draft resolution L6 entitled Economic and Social Repercussions of the Israeli Occupation on the Living Conditions of the Palestinian People in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem, and the Arab population in the occupied Syrian Golan. Will all Council members confirm that their votes are correctly reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the voting machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 47. Against, 3. Abstentions, 4. The draft resolution is adopted. Does a member of the Council wish to make a statement in explanation of the vote after the vote? That does not seem to be the case. Does any delegation wish to make a general statement on L6? If not, we will now move to take action on draft resolution E/2021/L7 entitled Situation of and Assistance to Palestinian Women. I have been informed that the draft resolution contains no program budget implications. Should any delegation not a member of the Group of 77 in China wish to co-sponsor draft resolution L7, please signify by pressing the microphone button. Turkey. Turkey has joined as co-sponsor. Colleagues, a recorded vote has been requested on draft resolution L7. Before we proceed to the vote, I will first give the floor to any delegation wishing to make a general statement in connection with the draft resolution, and thereafter to any member of the Council wishing to make a statement in explanation of vote. Does any delegation wish to make a general statement? Yes. Distinguished representative of Israel, you have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. President, during the discussion on the previous resolution, I elaborated on the procedural flaws in today's debate. I will not review again the ways the procedure is being skirted in order to consider the draft resolution. These shortcuts are the same ones that allow the Council to consider the previous draft resolution and are just as serious. Any violation of procedure, especially for narrow political ends, creates a worrying precedent. In addition to the procedural flaws, I wish to highlight some of the substantive flaws of the draft. In times of changes and great uncertainty, when all of our attention should be focused on the fight against COVID-19, we are discussing today yet again a resolution that presents a biased narrative of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, with no context and little to no resemblance to reality on the ground. Palestinian women face many challenges: oppressive intentional conditions and the associated domestic and gender-based violence, discrimination, and more. However, this resolution places the blame completely on Israel, as if it were the only cause of the problem that Palestinian women face. This reveals the true motivation for the resolution is a political one, and that there is no actual intent to solve the problems of the Palestinian women. The few changes made to the text reflect the fact that domestic social issues and policies, especially with regard to the situation of women, should be the focus of the debate. If the Palestinians genuinely want to improve the situation of the Palestinian women, they should focus on their effort domestically, rather than presenting a one-sided resolution in the UN. There is no other resolution in ECOSOC dedicated to a specific group of women. Colleagues, we encourage you to consider whether your vote today is a step toward a more constructive, better future, or if perhaps voting against the resolution might send a strong message to the Palestinian leaders to take responsibility for the challenges their people face. Blaming Israel is the Palestinian leaders' preferred tool for shifting attention away from their own failures. I therefore invite the Council to consider what is being asked of them. You are being asked to support a draft that is disconnected from reality, while looking aside as the rules of procedure are bent. This is why we ask members to vote against this resolution. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Israel. Is there any other delegation wishing to make a general statement? That does not seem to be the case. Does a member of the Council wish to make a statement in explanation of vote before the vote? Yes. The United States, distinguished representative of the United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United States wishes to underscore our longstanding concerns about this resolution, presented again at the 2021 ECOSOC session, and our continued opposition to it. We remain troubled at this body's insistence on including political elements and one-sided condemnations that detract from the real challenges at hand. This Council needs to refocus its energy toward shared goals, as this resolution is unhelpful to all involved. Politicizing these issues brings into question the impartiality of assistance that so many provide to assist Palestinian women. We remain concerned about the humanitarian situation in Gaza, including reports that Hamas authorities have undertaken efforts to limit women's ability to appear in public, and to move freely. We are also concerned that punishment of women for so-called ethical crimes continues unchecked. The United States continues to pursue the path that the President set out in January when presenting the U.S. vision for peace between Israel and the Palestinians. The only realistic path to end this conflict is through negotiations aimed at achieving a comprehensive and lasting peace. Politicized efforts in international and multilateral fora will do nothing to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We will continue to advance efforts to create a brighter and more prosperous future for all. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Brazil. Brazil has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brazil expressed its deep concern about the dire social and economic conditions in Palestine, which disproportionately affect women and girls, especially in the Gaza Strip. Brazil also reiterates its position in favor of urgent measures to ensure full respect for the human rights of all women and girls in Palestine. Brazil reaffirms its firm commitment to the rights and guarantees provided for in the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and in the Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women. In this regard, we congratulate Palestine for welcoming these instruments. The draft resolution under consideration highlights the central role of women in achieving, maintaining, and promoting international peace and security, especially in the Middle East. It also stresses the importance of the adoption of the National Action Plan to implement Security Council Resolution 325 by Palestine. The text stresses the importance for the adoption of the Family Protection Law in order to ensure that women and girls are protected from violence, including domestic violence. It addresses initiatives at different levels to promote women's rights, notably in relation to family law and in the fight against violence against women. Furthermore, it points out actions to improve the gender balance in civilian government positions and in security functions. Notwithstanding, Brazil considers that the resolution contains substantive elements that make the text unbalanced and partial. First, the draft resolution selectively addresses the situation of Palestinian women. In addition, it attributes solely to Israel the responsibility for violations of the human rights of women in Palestine, including the occupied Palestinian territory. As drafted, the project singles out Israel, which does not contribute to peace and mutual understanding in the region. Brazil doesn't ignore the relevant role that international organizations play in addressing the promotion of women's rights, including in Palestine. However, initiatives that perpetuate partial perspectives of reality on the ground to the detriment of a comprehensive and constructive approach are cause of concern. For the aforementioned reasons, Brazil will abstain. We affirm our willingness to work next year for a more balanced text. We hope that future initiatives on the topic will contribute to a lasting solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in favor of the full enjoyment of human rights by all women and girls. No situation authorizes or justifies any type of violence or discrimination against women. Brazil will continue to act in its firm defense of women's rights in an objective, balanced, and non-selective manner. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Brazil. Is there any other delegation wishing to make a statement in explanation of vote before the vote? That does not seem to be the case. The Council will now commence with the process of voting on draft resolution L7 entitled Code Situation of and Assistance to Palestinian Women, unquote. Council members are kindly requested to indicate their votes.
The Council is now voting on draft resolution L7 entitled Situation of and Assistance to Palestinian Women. Will all Council members confirm that their votes are correctly reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the voting machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 43, against 3, abstentions 8. Draft resolution L7 is adopted. Does a member of the Council wish to make a statement in explanation of the vote after the vote? That does not seem to be the case. Colleagues, we will now turn to